What I've chosen to focus on is just helping other autistic adults understand that they're valid people, that there shouldn't be any judgment around neurodivergence, that brains come in all different kinds of types and with all different abilities and all different needs. And our job is really to identify what we need and get our needs met. And there doesn't need to be a lot of shame in that.
Hey, all, before we get started, I'm actually really excited to do something right now. So I've always wanted to, on the podcast, to have a little summary in the beginning of the podcast that lets you know kind of what you're going to hear. And I have always struggled to do that because, one, I actually find the act of summarization quite difficult. And at the end of recording an episode, my brain is tired. And it just feels like it has a hard time doing that. As some of you might know, I've been really getting into AI tools, and Zoom has just recently added some AI tools to their platform. And so I was able to use the AI summary tool and then import that summary into ChatGPT to get sort of the highlights of today's podcast. And I'm going to share that with you. And if you are enjoying that, if this is something you would like me to continue to do, shoot me a message on any of my social media channels. You can use the contact page on the website, or you can also leave a review and then maybe make a comment about the summary at the beginning. Okay, so here's what we're going to be talking about today. We have Danielle Sullivan from the Neurodiverging Coaching from Neurodiverging Podcast, and we're going to be talking about her personal journey. We're going to talk about some communication nuances and unpacking the challenges and adaptability required for people with both ADHD and autism across different social contexts. We'll be exploring home dynamics, so practical strategies for managing a neurodiverse household and the importance of non-judgemental regulation. We'll also be exploring advocacy and some of the insights around advocacy, really exploring the idea of ableism and confronting ableism on the journey towards personal growth. We'll be talking about burnout and how to really understand the role of burnout and sensory overload, and talking about various self-care strategies. We're talking about some burnout prevention. And finally, we'll be exploring a little bit about tech and ADHD and how this can really be helpful. And there are some cutting edge things coming up in that world for us. So I hope you enjoy today's conversation. And again, if you like this little summary intro, let me know by shooting me a message on the website at ADHDrewired.com. I'll use the contact form, or on Facebook, or Instagram. I check LinkedIn sometimes, TikTok. I don't know. You can find me. Anyways, here's the episode. Enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Danielle Sullivan, who is the founder of Neurodiverging Coaching, which offers sliding scale neurodiversity-affirming coaching options for the community. They are a certified positive psychology coach, certified parent coach, and certified trauma-informed specialist. Danielle had intended to remain in academia to work on gender, disability, and religion, but pivoted after she was diagnosed as autistic around age 30, after her eldest child was also diagnosed. In looking for resources for herself, she found very little and began producing the Neurodiverging Podcast to try to develop and offer resources for others like her. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I do want to ask you first. So I see in the bio that you shared, your preferred pronouns are she, they. Mm-hmm. Is that working for you today?
That's perfect. Thank you for checking.
Awesome. All right. So let's just start with your story. So you said your kid was diagnosed with autism.
Absolutely.
What led you to start questioning, wait, is this maybe what I'm struggling with too?
So my first child was diagnosed with autism when he was about 2.5. And he had some of the stereotypical sort of things that I think most people are aware of with autism, like delayed speech, stereotyped movements of making the same movement over and over. Some of his gross motor development was a little kind of funny off. So I had started researching well before he was 2 as to whether he might be an autistic person and what we might need to do to get him resources for that. And the more I looked into how to identify autism in children, the more I started bumping into, at that time, mostly blogs and sort of memoirish blog posts from other autistic, many women who were talking about their experiences being late diagnosed autistic. And I found a lot of resonance in their stories. At the time, it was only about 10 years ago, and so much has changed in that 10 years, but it was very hard to find representation of autism in women type people. Even my son's presentation of autism is different from stereotypical. Autism's huge. Like now we know autism's this huge realm. But at the time, it was just most of us had this very stereotypical image of autism. So I realized, oh, this is me. This is me represented in all these other people's resources and blogs. And at the same time, I was parenting. And many of the resources I was finding online weren't from other parents, weren't from people who are navigating a late diagnosis and a re-understanding or reinterpretation, I guess, of my own identity, along with trying to raise a very small child with needs different than the large neurotypical community. And even understanding what neurotypicality was new for me. And so I really wanted to find resources that were like for parents who were proudly neurodivergent and also trying to parent neurodivergent kiddos. And that's kind of what got me started in this space of coaching and advocating.
So do you remember like some of the things that when you were reading some of these sort of memoir blog accounts where kind of that light bulb of like, oh my gosh, like that is me to a T?
Basically, yes, absolutely. I think I've probably said this a lot of times, but I was very much like the weird kid in school. My processing's a little slower. I pick up on social cues fine if I'm comfortable, but I was always uncomfortable in school. I have sensory differences. I was sort of always framed growing up as like a difficult child. And now once I was diagnosed, I was like, oh, I'm not actually being difficult. I just actually am need different things than the general population did. Some of the things, there were a couple of lists at the time, and I wish I could remember the authors of kind of like at the time the term used was Asperger's, and so there was like a list of Asperger women traits that maybe Samantha Kraft wrote up or somebody in that space. There were a couple of other like just common spaces, and some of them were like lots of sensory differences, being easily overwhelmed. The masking is huge, obviously, for women in any space with any sort of diagnosis. And, difficulty dating, understand relationships, understanding, not because I don't want to date or don't want relationships, but just understanding, well, when do we move into this further intimacy versus when do we stay not? That kind of stuff has always been really hard for me to pick up on. I'm kind of very frank and say what I mean, and which was fine in New York, but is not fine in other places. So lots of those kinds of things that are just really not the stereotypical male autism
presentation.
I can't think of another word for stereotypes, but yeah.
So did you then seek out an actual formal diagnosis?
Yeah, I did at the time. And was diagnosed autistic, as was my kiddo. And then later on was also diagnosed with ADHD, which percentage of us with both of them is huge, 70, 80%. So
yeah, because I used to do, I had a clinical practice where I specialized in both autism and ADHD.
Yeah.
And, it used to be that as a rule out of autism, like you can't have ADHD and autism. I'm like, wait, I've never seen autism without ADHD. Like maybe once, and I was confused by it, right? And what's so funny to me over the last like several, 3-4 months, as someone who has been specializing in ADHD and has ADHD, has a kid with autism, and have like always found it interesting how many clinicians and ADHD coaches sort of well into their like career and specializing in this, then realize that they also have ADHD. So that's always like kind of been this really interesting thing to me. And then just in the last few months, and I don't have a conclusive answer yet, this is still kind of a question mark, I've been exploring, am I somewhere on the spectrum? Because I've been finding that there's certain qualitative differences in my receptiveness to how I am being perceived coming off to others. And I think sometimes I'm missing some of those cues, like not always, but in certain scenarios, I definitely have a lot of sensory things going on. So it's like, it is a question that I'm still kind of exploring. And it's like, depending on what I'm reading, I'm like, yes, for sure. No, I don't think so. well, maybe. And that's frustrating.
The spectrum is huge and it's so diverse. And I think complicated or added complexity by, people's cultures, people's languages. Even in moving, I said I used to live near New York in northern New Jersey, and then I moved to Philadelphia. There's a style of communication out there and a frankness and a directness. And then I moved to Colorado, which is a very different politeness norms out here. And I've been here for 10 years. I still struggle. When people kind of try to gently urge me to do something, I very often don't pick up on it. And it's really changed my understanding of how the presentation is affected by the environment, not only by the individual person, but also just by what's around, what the family's like, what the people around are like. It's really interesting.
Can you give an example like of something where you said like the communication style now in Colorado, it's more of a gentle urging and you weren't picking up on it? And like, can you give us like a specific example or a story of like where you realized that and then what you do with that now?
Sure. So there's a common understanding of ask culture versus guest culture. Are you familiar with that?
No.
No? Okay. Well, ask culture is very prevalent in the Northeast United States and some other places in the country. And it's the very direct kind of New York. You tell people what you want and they tell you direct what you want. So you go up to buy your bagel and you say, hey, I want a bagel with cream cheese, toasted, whatever. There's no rudeness in that. You're honoring people's time and their productivity and their needs by just saying exactly what you want and then getting exactly what you want and leaving right away, right? In Colorado, which is a little mixed, but more of a guest culture, there's an expectation that the politeness norms are just so different. There's an expectation that you're going to show up to the bagel place and say, hey, how are you? How's your day going? And have this whole extended small talk, like establish rapport with the bagel guy before you even say, I really like a toasted plain with cream cheese but he also has to give this whole rapport back, and you have to like actually establish trust in some way before he'll get you your freaking bagel. And it takes like 20 minutes sometimes, but that's the way you offer respect. It's not by letting him get back to his life and have his time. It's by having this long communication and asking about, I don't know, his day and his kid and all this stuff. And both of those ways of being polite are fine. Like I'm not trying to judge one is better than the other, but the values are different. And so as an autistic person who's coming at this, and I was also, I do have some social anxiety and I was trained to engage with people a certain way. And you do have these internal scripts as an autistic person for, well, how do I order a bagel? So when I moved to Colorado, well, now I have to relearn how do I order a bagel based on these other people's value systems without being rude. And then also, how do I get groceries? How do I go to the bank? How do I walk my dog? If I'm like walking with my baby and the baby's upset, do I have to stop and talk to this random person on the side of the road, or can I like handle my baby? There's all this. It was a total rejiggering of my internal scripts on top of learning new politeness norms, on top of everything else that comes when you change your environment. So there's my long rambling story about that, but it's really interesting.
I think it's a really good sort of demonstration of how, especially with autism, that like context is everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I used to work with kids and some young adults with autism, when they're trying to learn about what to do in various situations, the answer is always, it depends. It always depends, which is for someone who needs those rules and like the clear cut, like, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Yeah. And it's like, well, there are so many variables. So like for yourself, like how do you cope with those variables in novel situations?
To be completely honest, I don't expose myself to novel situations super often right now, mostly because I'm currently a stay-at-home parent. I am homeschooling with 2 neurodivergent kids. Oh, wow. I have this business that I run out of my home. And so I guess the novel situations that I'm going on this, I've done podcasts before, but I'm, meeting you for the second time. We're talking together. This is novel in that I don't quite know you. I do have some vague trust that we're, in the same world and we're trying to together, educate and elucidate the world for other folks. But I'm also environmentally very safe right now, right? I'm in my house. I'm in my safe space. I have my coffee. I've done my morning routine. And so it's a lot about building strategies and scaffolding that keeps me feeling as safe and regulated as I can while going into novel situations. And it's a lot of that growth zone, trying to stretch the growth zone, but not pop the balloon of it, where I'm not dysregulating myself so far, but I am still able to do quote unquote novel things just by adjusting the environment around it or the surroundings around it. Yeah. But I could maybe go to explore a new city by myself, but I couldn't take my kids with me because that's like way too much to handle, right? Or I can try a new grocery store if I have nothing else to do that day because it's going to take me 4 times as long to get out of there.
Yeah.
So it's always about building out from what's the priority and then how do we scaffold that to be the most successful for me, knowing what I know about my own limits.
And how old did you say your kids are?
I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. They're the best. Yeah.
Aw, that's awesome. So when you mentioned like traveling, like I took my son just for a long weekend over the summer to Wisconsin Dells, and like it was the first time it was just me and him going on a little vacation together, and I was quite anxious about it. It was, there was like I was even going on to like the Google Maps Street View so I can actually see what like the front entrance of the place is going to looks like. It just like gave me like a sense of calmness about it. How do you do that? Because like I just have one, and like I get overwhelmed and overstimulated. And he's also like hyperverbal, and I have like audio processing issues sometimes. And it's just like sometimes we are a big sensory mismatch.
Yeah. I think the sensory mismatch is really common. And so part of what I do is I work with families who are mixed neurotypes, say. And sometimes that's neurotypical parents with neurodivergent kids, but sometimes it's just everybody's neurodivergent and slightly different needs. And you do have those competing needs. For us, my kids are really close in age. They're very different, but we worked so much on communication and on saying what you need, trying to meet other people's needs, but also take breaks, take breaths, all those regulation strategies. We started really young with those because I would get overwhelmed. I was like basically in burnout before I found out I was autistic. I didn't know what burnout was at the time, but both my kids were born, they're 22 months apart. So I had basically a pregnancy, a birth, and then a year-ish in which my kid was not developing typically. And we were very concerned and doing all these doctor appointments. And then I had another pregnancy, another birth, and then that kiddo was intense and it remains intense. So I really had to learn just a ton of regulation strategies when they were born. And that helped. When I was diagnosed, it helped a lot because it was like, oh, your nervous system is this way. You're trying all these things for this nervous system, but you don't even have the neurotypical nervous system. Let's pivot. Let's work on the neurodivergent nervous system. And teaching those to my kids has been amazing, but also just being really upfront about like, I have auditory processing disorder diagnosed, and I don't process auditory information the same way everybody else does. And that means I might need to ask my kid to repeat something 17 times and they might get annoyed, but also we know that it's no one's fault, right? Like that everyone's trying their best and we just need to be patient. And sometimes I'm going to say, I'm really overwhelmed. I need to take a break. Or, hey, I think your sibling's getting really overwhelmed. Let's let them have a break. So just building in that kind of non-judgmental regulation strategy rhetoric into our household has been really helpful. And then having really clear goals. Like I was saying is my goal today to try the new grocery store, or is it to like have the rest of my life? When the kids and I want to try something new, like we tried dog sitting at a friend's place earlier this summer where we went to a new city, we stayed in a new house with new pets. One of my kiddos is really pet oriented. And so we framed the priority as, for me as a parent, just to get them to experience new novel things, right? But for me as a parent, that was it. That was the only goal. It was get them there, help them sleep, let them be in a new place for 2 days, come home. And having that as the clear goal really reduced the stress of trying to do literally anything else in this new place. Like we could have gone and hiked, we could have explored new, parks, we could have done anything. But really the goal was like, let's take care of this dog well, and let's get my kid to novel experiences. And so having a really clear idea of what's your priority, like why are you doing the novel thing, can really help me reduce the stress of trying to do too much or overwhelm myself.
It's funny when you were saying that, I was thinking I could probably benefit from having the less is more approach to novel situations sometimes, because especially if I'm in a new environment and it's like there's fun stuff to do, I'm always like, let's just do one more thing. Let's just do one more thing. And knowing that like, okay, am I going to push it like so far that like, oh, I'm going to keep discovering what his limits are. And it's I think getting up to that limit and even like, maybe pushing your toe a little bit across, I think is healthy, right? Because it allows us to expand outside of our comfort zone, because then our comfort zone gets bigger, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, that like being in a new city and having that as a very clear goal, that's a really, I think no matter what neurotype are, we as parents are or our kids are, like, that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind.
I'm glad to hear it's helpful. I also have that mentality of what if I just do one more thing? What if I just do one more thing? And my youngest especially has really limited my ability to do that. She is fantastic, but she also is very anxious. And so we're always trying to figure out, how do we stretch our comfort zone like an inch? Because if we go past that, we might have, a week of meltdowns and restricted, like really pulling back and having a lot of stress, which harms her and also harms the whole family. And so we want to encourage her to develop, but also when I talk to parent coaching clients, I'm always saying, like, we want to stretch the comfort zone balloon. We do not want to pop the comfort zone balloon, right? So you are, like you're saying, trying to make it bigger. But if you push too hard with certain kids, you're going to pop it and you lose all that trust that you built. And you're starting from square one and they're completely dysregulated. The trust is gone. The balloon is popped and it's just not worth it. So we're always trying to balance that in my family, just with the personalities and neurotypes we have, of how do I balance what I want to do and also what everybody else needs, and do the best we can.
Let's do this. We're going to take a really quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the work that you are doing around raising awareness around adult autism.
Perfect.
So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our award-winning intensive coaching and accountability groups. Learn more and get your name added to our winter interest list by going to coachingrewired.com. Hey, grab your phone or open up your calendars and go to Tuesday, November 14th. If you don't already have our monthly Q&A on the calendar there, put it there at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Go ahead and add it and set it to repeat every second Tuesday of the month. Go ahead, I'll wait. Or you can just hit pause and I'll be here when you get back. All right, got that on your calendar? Great. Keep that date open on November 14th, because right after our live Q&A, we'll also be holding a post Q&A registration kickoff event for our winter season of coaching and accountability groups. Put it in your calendar. We'll be starting that around 11:45 a.m. Pacific, 2:45 p.m. Eastern. Come to the Q&A to get your ADHD questions answered. Stay for the post Q&A registration kickoff event to get your coaching group questions answered. Start your pre-registration process with us and get signed up. For all things ADHD Rewired Coaching, go to coachingrewired.com and be sure to get your name added to our winter interest list to receive reminders for our upcoming winter kickoff event on Tuesday, November 14th. So where is one area of your life right now that you've always wanted to gain momentum on, but have felt stuck in one place for too long? Where do you want to be as you start the new year so you can make 2024 your best year yet? What would it mean for you if you could create a roadmap for your life and not have to create it alone? If you are ready to learn new skills or enhance the strategies you already have to live better with your ADHD, get supportive accountability from like-brained people just like you, and you are ready to create your roadmap to move closer to your biggest goals, then join us. We'll be starting our winter season on January 11th. So why not get a head start and get on our winter interest list now by going to coachingrewired.com. Come grow with us and make sure you got it on your calendar that Tuesday, November 14th, you can join us for our winter kickoff event following our live Q&A. To get started, that's coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. Hey, and if you're maybe in the car right now and you can't do that, maybe grab your phone and just say, hey Siri, remind me when I get home to go to coachingrewired.com and put my name on the interest list. And we're back. All right, so let's talk a bit about what you're doing around raising awareness around autism in adults.
So I think that the main thing that I'm doing is I run the Neurodiverging Podcast, which is really just my attempt to explain what life is like as a late identified autistic parent. And that's now spanned into coaching other autistic people. Advocacy is so complicated because there's so many layers of it. There's literally so much you can be doing. And I think it's really important as an advocate, for me personally, to have a very focused goal. Like I was just saying with going pet sitting, right? I'm all about goals. I think it's really easy to see everything that needs to be changed in the world and get overwhelmed
Yeah.
and feel like you can't do anything. And so what I've chosen to focus on is just helping other autistic adults understand that they're valid people, that there shouldn't be any judgment around neurodivergence, that brains come in all different kinds of types and with all different abilities and all different needs. And our job is really to identify what we need and get our needs met. And there doesn't need to be a lot of shame in that. And also just to highlight the ableism that's inherent in the world as it's built now, right? So this idea that the world is built for certain kinds of brains, certain kinds of bodies, and not for others, and try to make changes in that as we can. And I really think, for me anyway, that consciousness raising piece, that kind of disability 101 piece of just explaining to people, like, how we have ramps so that folks with
Yes.
wheelchair needs can get up into the building. Like, how can we make the building so that autistic people can go in there, and ADHDers and bipolar people and anybody else with a neurodivergent brain? And so really trying to start at level one and question assumptions around how we do things and why we do things, and help other people think through that. I think that's got to be kind of the 101 of advocacy. Is just, we need more people who are willing to feel safe coming out as autistic, so that we know what autism looks like broadly, so that we can make better changes to support autistic people. But if people don't feel safe to come out because people have all these misunderstandings of what autism even is, then how can we even start to fix the world? So that was a big, long explanation. That's my 101 goal, is like just to literally raise awareness of what autism is and what it can look like.
Yeah, I think that the ableism that I see kind of everywhere, it's rampant. And one of the things that I've also noticed too is that so many people are so unaware that they're even doing it. And I've had conversations with people, or I kind of point this out, and you can sort of see this look of like sort of embarrassment and surprise and like ponderment. I don't know if that's a word, but I think you know what I meant. Pondering, give you an idea.
Yeah.
I make up words on the podcast sometimes. This past weekend, so I'm in the Chicago area. I'm a huge fan of the band Fish. So I saw them all 3 nights. I brought my partner with. It was the first time she had gone to see Fish. She has a leg injury. And so I had floor seats. They're not seats. They're general admission standing room. She has a leg injury. She's using a cane right now. So the first night, she was kind of miserable, right? Because on the floor, having a cane where your leg hurts, that sucks. So the next day we went, and I went to the guest services to go talk to the people who take care of all the ADA stuff and see, is there a way to exchanges. And they were very accommodating. But the thing that made kind of warm my heart is they had a sign for sensory bags. And I was just like, oh, really? Okay. And I just wanted to get to where we wanted to go, because I was like, I should have asked to see what's in there. My guess was probably maybe a little bit of a fidget something and headphones, or, but that was wonderful just to see that at a Fish show, or just a huge, loud, overstimulating space. So it's good to see that it's emerging in different pockets, but there's still so much work to be done.
I have seen so many industries or pieces of industries anyway who've been starting to make attempts, and it's deeply still imperfect, and I think there's a lot of work still to be done. But we go to a lot of children's museums and many of them have sensory friendly days when you can go, and it's low attendance and quiet, and there's no music, and they've shut off water features and that kind of thing. Many of them have that kind of sensory basket or something that you can get at the desk, or a pile of headphones. I talked to somebody about an article a couple of years ago where they were writing an article on making breweries beer is huge in Colorado, making breweries in Colorado more accessible for autistic people, and talking about what could breweries do. And I'm like, the fact that all these little industries are trying to make, basic level attempts is so great, because again, the more awareness we get, the more people have headphones available, or even the sign that says, ask us if you need support, means that more people will ask questions about, well, why is this support? Who's that support for? Oh, I never thought of that. And just to start that awareness piece. So the next time they meet somebody who's maybe acting differently than they expect, or speaking differently than they expect, or stimming in the street or whatever, that they don't make those immediate negative judgments, and maybe won't come across as ableist. So, yeah. I want to say too that outside of neurotypical people behaving in an ableist manner, because they've been taught to, so many of the neurodivergent clients that I speak with have so much internalized ableism. They've been, especially us late diagnosed people, it's with everybody, even if they were diagnosed when they were 4 or 5, but people who are finding out about a diagnosis in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s have had decades of I'm not good enough. I should just be able to do it. I'm not trying hard enough. I must just be lazy.
What's
Why
wrong
can't
with
I?
me?
Yeah, exactly. All that stuff. And that's internalized ableism. That's
Yeah.
thinking that you should be able to do something just because you're not trying hard enough. Discounts how much is against you in a world that's not built for you. And I always say, if you could have done it, you would have done it. Like there's no, if you could have done it, you would have done it already. So there must be some other gap going on, right? So let's identify what that gap is. It's so heartbreaking, but also so validating to see people start to work around that.
And it's such an important piece of this. And I think just for, I'm thinking about listeners who might be saying, well, yeah, that's easy for you two. Mm-hmm. I also still struggle with it. Like it emerges for me sometimes too. And I'm sometimes surprised when I'm really sort of observing my own sort of thoughts and frustrations. Like I was having a conversation with one of my coaches about, with our coaching groups, and we were kind of having a little bit of trouble filling up one of our seasons because the economy has just kind of been crap, this year. And he says to me, he's like, are you taking responsibility for the way the economy is right now? Because it kind of sounds like it. And I was like, maybe. So it's always really good to have good people to call you out on your own shit who just like know you well. And I've been thinking about that since he asked me that question. It's like, wow, like that stuff goes deep.
It really digs in there. And like you were saying, I catch myself out daily. Like it doesn't go away. It's more that I think once you're aware of it, you can develop some systems or I hate saying systems and strategies because it sounds so coachy, but I can't think of another word right now. But some sort of almost funnel in your brain of, if I catch myself thinking this, remember, society, capitalism, the world, it's just, I was exhausted on Saturday and I slept most of the day, and I'd had this huge to-do list, and I slept most of the day. And I woke up on Sunday and I was all down on myself, and I was all like, what's wrong with you? You didn't even do anything that complicated on Friday. Like, why'd you have to sleep so much? We could have gotten all this stuff done. And then I was like thinking about the political situation and how much news I'd consumed and how high one of my children's needs was on that Friday when I'd had a good day, but they had not, or they had a challenging day. And I was like, actually, you slept because you needed it. And I have to trust that in this one case, at least, my body slept because it needed sleep. I don't need to be judging myself about that and saying, oh, you could have done it better, right? Like I did it the way I did it for a reason in this case. And that's got to be good enough. And I got to move forward from that and be like, okay, I slept, I needed it. Now what? What's the next thing? So I think it's really, even in those of us who are actively doing the work day to day and working with people day to day, like you and I are, you still catch yourself all the time. It's really baked in there. It's not about digging it out. It's more about noticing it and kind of, well, okay, I said it's not about digging it out, but now I'm thinking of like the archaeology metaphor where you're like dusting it off and actually it is still in there. So maybe it is digging it out, but not moving it anywhere. It's still there. You just exposed it a little more.
I am saying this with the most amount of respect. That was probably one of the most autistic explanations of a metaphor, and I loved it. So thank you.
Probably fair, yeah. One of those things that was on that list of like autism in women is overly formal speech, right? And that is always, even when I was little, apparently my parents say that I was a delayed speaker. I had ear infections too, so who knows? But I didn't speak till I was 4 or 5. What'd you say?
So I had like chronic ear infections when I was a kid.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that's like linked, like it's not positive, right? But it's correlated to autism. And so did my kiddo who was diagnosed when he was 2, chronic ear infections, so who knows? But so I was a delayed speaker, but apparently my first couple of words were like complete sentences that were like very well thought out. And I'm like, yeah, that tracks because I still have that formal, a little bit overly academic, and I can try to fix it and I can throw in some slang, but it still comes back. It's just the way my brain works. So.
Yeah. It's funny when you say that, like when you were talking about your kids and sort of like their developments, and it sounded like there a lot of like asynchronous development.
Oh yeah.
With, my son he was reading by the time he was 1 year old, like legit reading. What was so tragic about it is that his fine motor skills were so delayed that he couldn't turn the pages on his own of the books he was reading.
Thing. That's so frustrating. I would be, as a compulsive reader, I would say, somebody who should really maybe sometimes not be reading as much and should be doing other things, but I really enjoy it. That's so tragic. I can't even imagine not being able to turn the pages. I would be so upset all the time.
You probably relate to something he shares with me sometimes. He's like, I wish I could read slower because I go through my books too fast.
Yep.
And I'm just like, oh my gosh. Like, I was thinking about how I used to read when I was like his age, and I hated it because like my brain just thinks about other stuff while I'm reading, and you can't really process what you're reading if you're thinking about other stuff.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay. Let's take one more quick break. I want to talk more about burnout when we come back. So we will be right back. All right. Today's fake ad is inspired by COVID-19 because I have COVID and it sucks. ADHD making you feel totally zapped, struggling to concentrate and motivate when you're having an off day, sick of wasting time vegging on the couch? Introducing your secret weapon against the ADHD blahs, the Energy Enhancer Station. This all-in-one audio-visual sensory immersion pod is designed to stimulate and reinvigorate your mind and body when you're feeling low energy. The Energy Enhancer Station surrounds you with energizing LED light patterns, executive function enhancing binaural beats, and invigorating scents to get your senses firing. Following along with specialized breathing exercises and gentle chair yoga designed to boost circulation and clear brain fog. In just 10 minutes, you'll feel refreshed, refocused, and ready to take on the day's challenges. The Energy Enhancer Station is perfect for a pick-me-up first thing in the morning or anytime your ADHD symptoms have you feeling unmotivated and adrift. Stop wasting hours in a low-energy limbo. The Energy Enhancing Station's multi-sensory stimulation targets executive functions and reboots productivity so you can seize the day. Energy Enhancing Station, powering up your mind and body when ADHD has you down. These claims have not been tested because it is not a real product. But you know what is real? Unicorns. And the support and connection you can get right here at ADHD Rewired. From the podcast to our coaching and accountability groups to our virtual co-working community at adelestudyhall.com to our free and secret Facebook group, which you could apply to join at adhdrewired.com/community. And of course, if you love what we are doing here, consider supporting our work by becoming a patron, because these podcasts, they are free to you, but they are not free to produce. So check it out and check out the perks and become a patron at adhdrewired.com/Patreon. So we are back. Let's talk about burnout and what burnout is generally. And is there a difference? Because I've been hearing this term recently, autistic burnout. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that. So let's talk about burnout, autistic burnout, and sort of everything in between.
Sure. So I always just preface this kind of stuff by saying I've never been a neurotypical person. I've had periods where I thought I was a neurotypical person experiencing neurotypical burnout, but I have never been and I will never be. And so I can give my best ideas. From what I understand, neurotypical burnout comes from basically expending more energy over time than you can generate, right? Just this very basic sort of equation of you're trying to do more things, be more things, participate in more things than you can actually do. And sometimes that's, with your workplace, sometimes that's with the family. It can be with personal relationships, right? And it is in some ways kind of gendered and sex towards, women experience burnout more than men, which is not to say men do not experience burnout, but just that there's a relationship to the workload, right? And the mental workload as well. Autistic burnout is a little bit different in that it's not just you're doing too much all the time. It's that you might be physically doing too much, but also you are masking, you are trying to fit in to neurotypical culture. So you are basically pretending to be another person your whole day. And this can be at work, at school, but also sometimes with your partner and with your kids and in intimate spaces where you should be able to relax and be your full self. The other piece of, I think, neurodivergent burnout is sensory, that not all of us, but many, many, many of us experience significant sensory overwhelm throughout our day. And if you don't have practices in place to mitigate that, your brain is literally being inundated with stuff all day especially autistic and ADHDers, but other forms of neurodivergent people as well, filter sensory input differently, process sensory input differently, sometimes can't process sensory input. And it is basically an extra load on our nervous system compared to what I understand the neurotypical experience to be. And over time, all this sort of grinding from different directions can cause just a break, really, a mental wellness, mental health break. And it doesn't mean like a psychotic break, but rather that a lot of us get extremely depressed, suicidal, extremely anxious, impulsive, turn to behaviors that are attempts to mitigate pain, right? So alcoholism, drug use, painkiller use, that kind of stuff, sex addiction, looking for ways to feel better, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, I think it parallels maybe the neurotypical experience, that we're engaging in similar behaviors, but the reasons are different and our effect on the nervous system is different. One more thing I just want to say really quickly is that many neurodivergent people are experiencing, as we spoke of briefly, intense ableism day to day. So there's tons of microaggressions that we're dealing with day to day that over time can compound into a trauma, right? And we know that traumatized nervous systems are not as resilient. So many of us are struggling to get through life, even in a feeding ourselves, bathing ourselves, getting up from bed kind of sense. But it's not depression. It looks like depression, but it's because our basic needs of being neurodivergent brains are just not being met. And once you start to fix, like reducing masking, reducing internalized ableism, figuring out strategies for offering safe food and safe spaces and safe, work environments, people start to spiral back up and be fine again. So the strategies for addressing it are different and the needs of the person are different. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. And so what would you say was it when your kids were little? Like, was that when you were first kind of experiencing that burnout?
I think in retrospect, I have had burnouts since I was very, very, very young. I just didn't recognize them for what they were. And my mother is a nurse practitioner and a fantastic parent. She used to have books on our shelves called like Handling Your Pessimistic Child, right? And like, I was a reader, so it's not like she like handed this to me to handle. She wasn't trying to make it my problem, but I had things that I thought were anxiety, depression symptoms when I was a kid. I do have that sort of autistic behavior of wanting to know what to expect, having trouble in social situations. Like, so I often came off as like, very stringent, very restricted, wanting it the way I wanted it, right? Demanding, maybe picky, those kinds of words that are judgment words. And I think people didn't recognize it was autism, and it caused like just so many problems. And it caused me to feel like I wasn't doing good enough. And so I did feel depressed and anxious, but also on top of that, I was like a good student, but struggled with the social relationships at school, didn't really have friends, like had the lunch table that I could sit at, but it wasn't like a safe space. Didn't really feel safe at home for various reasons, no abuse or anything, just like the situation, the environment. And I think that I really, like, my nervous system got dysregulated really young. So I had periods of intense overwhelm and depression and fatigue and what I now recognize to be burnout from maybe when I was 7 or 8. But the first one I really recognized as being, in retrospect, a problem was when I graduated college. I tried to get work and I was successful in the interviews, but then I would get there and I couldn't do 40-hour weeks. I was just completely overwhelmed and I became suicidal. I became depressed. I went back down to like a 25-hour, 30-hour work week, which I could manage, but it wasn't great. And also there was no money. So I was like very poor. And then fast forward 10 years, I had my kids. I did have postpartum depression diagnosed, but also on top of that, I hadn't known I was autistic before I had babies. Babies are a huge change, and you can plan your heck, like, and I did plan the heck out of it. We had meal trains, we had diaper service, we had like, scheduled everything, but you don't know who you're going to get. Like, you don't know who you're having before you meet them. And so I was really not prepared to accommodate the massive changes and disruptions that a child would bring. And then he was autistic. He had ear infections. He required significant medical intervention. I was pregnant again. And it was just like so much. And I was going to bed, I was nursing 2 babies. My co-parent and I weren't communicating great at the time because I was just so overwhelmed. He was overwhelmed too, in retrospect, but it was just like, he was undiagnosed ADHD at the time. And I was just going to bed at 5 p.m. Like he would get home from work and I would go to bed and I would stay there. Right. And he would bring me a baby to nurse, but like I could not function. I was not eating. I was not sleeping. I was just laying in the dark for like 5 hours every night. That's autistic burnout, right? It's not like I wanted to do that. It wasn't depression. It was just, I'm going to avoid all stimulation because I cannot handle it because I will break if I do. So
was there something that you felt really helped you sort of emerge from that?
No, finding out that I was autistic. Because before that, I didn't understand why I was so overwhelmed. It was a lot of that internal judgment of everybody else can do it. You know, how many people do you know who have 2 babies under 3 who are fine? Like they're not like well slept or anything, but they're fine. They're up, they're going to the gym, they're eating, they have friends, they're going for walks, you know, they're showing up at the kids' museums. I couldn't do any of that. And so it felt like I was failing. And when I got the assessment, it was like, well, even before that, when I started to self-identify, it was like, oh no, you're in autistic burnout. We have steps to correct this. We know what to do about this. Even though it was a hard climb back up the stairs, it was like, oh, this is sensory. Couldn't even identify it as sensory overwhelm before I got the diagnosis. I didn't understand like what sensory overwhelm was or what was happening.
What's that phrase that when you can name it, you can tame it?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Because then it was like, oh, actually, I was switching from feeling tired but okay-ish to extremely dysregulated at the drop of a pin. Like it was like black and white switch. And I often have clients come in who say, I can't tell that I'm about to break and then I'm broken and everybody's looking at me and I'm crying in the corner. It really was learning what are my triggers? What's going to cause me to flip, right? And then what can I do to catch that ahead of time? It's one of those things that's really hard to learn initially, but then the more you practice, the better you get. And now it's like I haven't had a meltdown or anything for like a couple of years, despite having some very significant traumatic events happen to me in the past couple of years, just like everybody else, I mean. But the difference in just knowing your neurotype is different, your needs are different, these things exist, and learning what to do about it was the thing. Like it wouldn't have happened without that.
So what are your like go-to sort of strategies for not just managing burnout, but like the prevention piece of burnout, which I think is so important?
Yeah. Because once a client comes in and they're already in burnout, we can help you try to mitigate it. But a lot of times it's like, can you not go to work for a while? Can you cocoon basically? Can you drop everything as best you can? And that's really hard for people. So really prevention is way less stress and emotionally, but also like kind of logistically. I think the best thing people can learn to do is learn about your sensory systems. Start to know what your triggers are. Are you somebody who gets overwhelmed by certain smells or noises or textures? I was getting constantly overwhelmed by my bed sheets, but I never thought about it, right? Like these little things you engage with every day. You know, can you tell when you're hot or cold? Can you make changes? Are you on, if you don't notice that you're hungry, like many of us don't, interoception can be hard for us. Are you on an eating schedule? Do you have a phone timer that goes off so you're drinking enough, right? Like just putting in your basic and not judging yourself for needing a timer to drink, right? That kind of stuff. So it's this, first of all, accepting that it is the way it is and it's not bad. It's just the way it is. So let's try to approach it head on and not judge ourselves for it, but set the phone timer and drink your water, right? And then after that, adding the specific strategies of starting from level 1 of, like I'm saying, sleeping and eating, right? And going to the bathroom. Check in with all that stuff and then work on, say, your work schedule or your kids or your whatever. But we really got to start basic. Like people want to start with like their household chore schedule or something. And it's like, no. Are you eating? Are you drinking? Are you sleeping? Let's just start there. Maybe check in with your meds if you have a medical health or a mental health team and you're on meds. But those are your like one-on-one things, right? Checking in with sensory systems and just doing the internalized work of thinking like, do you know what you're feeling when you're feeling it? A lot of us who are all the way into burnout are really shut down. We've been traumatized into burnout. That might mean you're disassociated and that's okay. Like it happened to you, but can we safely start to help you recognize your own feelings so that you can understand what they're telling you, right? Because they exist for a reason. They're telling you something. So if you're angry all the time, like why? What is that anger telling you? If you're sad all the time? And that will help you make changes.
Have you read, I was just actually trying to look up the author because I never remember author's name. It's called Burnout. I'm seeing it.
Is it the sisters who wrote Come As You Are? Was it quite a good book?
I was like, because it's funny. And I just searched.
I don't remember authors either.
All right, so this book I was we took a moment to look it up because I couldn't remember the title or the author. So it's Burnout by Emily Nagoski. and someone else. It's trying to do too many things. My Audible thing is going off. One of the keys in that, because my therapist at the time recommended this book to me, and she prefaced it saying it explicitly targets towards women. She's like, but just like, I think you're gonna like this, and I did. I was like, why is it targeted towards women? Because I thought this was so helpful. The idea that when you're experiencing burnout and you don't sort of recover from the stress from burnout by addressing the stressor, it's about addressing the actual physical stuff that the stress is creating. So it's like you're stressed out from work. It's not necessarily just like taking a break from work. It's like, what are you doing with that stress? Are you exercising? Are you getting outside? Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Like all those kinds of things. And I just found that to be so helpful, because I think sometimes it's easy to sort of throw our hands up in the air when stuff gets too hard. And, for a lot of us, we don't have that ability always to, because if we throw our hands up in the air, now we don't have a roof over our head because we need to, keep making a living. Right. And so knowing that, like, for me, like my exercise is like so non-negotiable, every once in a while, and I actually just recently went through this. So I just went into a little bit of a dip on my exercise, and it impacts me in such a profound way.
Yeah.
And so it was like, there was a couple of weeks where I was like, maybe exercising twice a week, and it wasn't that like intensive of a workout. And like, I was feeling the impact of that. And so like, I get to this point where I get sick and tired of like, why do I just not give a shit about anything, and feeling annoyed and like, oh, I haven't been working out. It's like I start stepping up the frequency and intensity of my workouts. How many times do I need to relearn this lesson?
Yeah. No, I think I haven't. So I haven't read that book, though I've read other stuff by the author. And I think that book's on my to-read list, but my to-read list is so long. But I think that people forget / never knew sometimes that emotions are physical. They're in the body, right?
Yeah.
There's your interpretation of what you're feeling. But before that interpretation, there is the feeling. It's a thing that you can't, how do I want to say? You can interpret the heck out of it. You can be like, I'm irritable because work, because this thing, because Barbara at that meeting. But really, there's a chemical reaction happening in your body. You have to complete that stress cycle, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're irritable is such a good one too, because it's like, for me, that immediately pings like you have extra energy, extra height, and you need to reduce that, right? So how do you do that? You exercise, you take a walk, you go out and yell, right? You physically punch something. You have to like let your body know that you're safe again. Your whole system geared up for that kind of, anger, irritability are responses to feeling like something's not fair or something's not right. You have to make it right again, right? So how do you do that for yourself? Same thing if you're, sad, happy, excited. There's your interpretation of the event that caused that emotion, but the emotion itself is just a thing in your body, right? So there has to be this level. I'm not saying totally discount your real life experiences, but I am saying that there are layers to it that people sort of want to flatten out. And it's really important to think through, like, what is your body trying to do by sending you this stuff, right? And how can you help your body complete what it needs to restore back to that centered, sort of regulated piece? It's kind of an exciting puzzle. Like as a coach, I really love that stuff. When a client comes in, I don't want you to feel crappy, but if you come in feeling crappy, I'm going to be like, oh, tell me more about like, what are the feelings? What are the precursors? Because it is really cool to start to understand how you can make yourself feel better. You can't fix what random name did I say? Opinions or the photocopier not working or whatever. All my office experiences are from like the 1980s, apparently, in this podcast, the photocopier. But you can understand your own stuff and like figure out how to bring yourself back to calm and center. We don't all have to be Zen people, but you could be like somewhat regulated most of the time. That would really help a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can all of us, I think neurodivergent and not, to learn how to cope with. We live in a crazy world right now. Like there's so much out of our control that just like breaks my brain because it just doesn't make sense. And I think that the idea that, and I think it's becoming more of an accepted idea, but that self-care is not selfish. It's so crucial. And I think that, maybe for people who this idea is new to them, like, yeah, I'll do the self-care once I get the to-do list done. Good luck with that.
The self-care it needs to happen
it's
for you to get the to-do list done. It's like, it's the basic building block of the whole thing.
It's all the stuff that sounds like soft and mushy. It's the self-care before the to-do list. It's the self-compassion before the to-do list. It's the loving ourselves and doing the best that we can and knowing that sometimes we're not going to show up in the way we want to. And like learning how to like forgive ourselves and make peace with that we are doing the best we can. And sometimes our best might not be what we want.
Well, that's part of that growth perspective, right? Is that you're not born perfect. You're probably not going to die perfect. There is no perfect. It doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. Just like the normal quote unquote brain doesn't exist. There is no normal brain. There's just our brains, right? There's just us as people. There's no perfect people, just us. So just do the best you can. And remember that you can always get better. Like there's no ceiling for you, you just keep trying and just keep going for it. And you're going to totally fuck up, but whatever, like we all fuck up. It's fine. Just, that doesn't mean we have to judge ourselves about it and just stop doing it. Cause then how are you ever going to grow? And just to swing back to the advocacy piece from before too, what you were saying about self-care is I think that a lot of us forget that you literally cannot help anybody else. It is really mushy, right? You can't help anyone else unless you have your own air mess first. But it's like, if you are constantly dysregulated and falling apart and angry and making other people clean up your mess because you can't, and not to be judgy, but you're not in a place where your nervous system is solid, like stopping and doing that work will help you be able to support that self-care, then community care, right? So if you want community care to be a thing and collective care to be a thing, you have to do you first. That's just how it works. You can't do it the other way. It doesn't work.
I don't think I have anything to add to that. Danielle, share with us your website and how people can reach you. And thank you so much for sharing your stories and a lot of strategies and the things that you've are working through. And I think this is a really valuable conversation for a lot of listeners.
Sure. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I feel like my goal is just to offer support for folks. So the website is neurodiverging.com. So it's your gerund, your ing. And there's a podcast there. We have blogs. We have other stuff. Go check it out. Yeah. And I hope this was helpful for your folks. So,
well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And that is it for today, my neurodivergent friends. Thank you again to Danielle Sullivan for chatting with me for today's show. Get the resources and show notes from today's episode at adhdrewired.com/podcast. If you want to get uninterrupted listening to the show with announcements at the very end, why not become a patron at $5 a month or more? Then if you're looking for a taste of a group coaching, patrons at $25 a month can join me every fourth Tuesday of the month for a monthly coaching call. Want to start a discussion about the topics covered today? Why not check out our free Facebook community? Go to adhdrewired.com/community to apply so you can check out all the action happening over there. Then if you're looking for some real-time accountability or weekly sessions to help keep you on track, whether it's for cleaning, writing, decluttering, studying, big projects, little projects, or just want to check in, go ahead and check out our Adult Study Hall community at adultstudyhall.com. It is free to try for the first week and only $19.99 a month after that. Find everything ADHD Rewired, including show notes for this podcast at adhdrewired.com. One more thanks again to Danielle for chatting with me today, and thanks to all of our listeners, supporters, guests, and community members for tuning in and helping to continue to make this show possible. That's all for now. We'll catch you next week. And now I'm going to go lay down.